Good morning, everyone, and a Happy New Year to you. Welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting, our first of the new year. The meeting today is being live streamed. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us in this way. I am Karen Vincent, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee. Unfortunately, Councillor Moncur is unable to be here as planned due to family illness. So please join me in sending Ian and his family our best wishes, and in his absence, I will be chairing today's meeting. I shall now read out the fire safety notice. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the fire alarm sounds, we will evacuate the building. There are 2 fire exits from this room. One is through the double doors where you came in, and the other door is to the right of the stage, which leads to an external fire escape. Please note that depending on the location of the fire, use of the lift may be prohibited. However, we do have an evac chair and trained staff to assist people with mobility issues. In the event of an evacuation, we meet to the left of the driveway at the main entrance to Thorpe Lodge. Thank you. Today, we're being supported by Helen Bowman, our Senior Planning Officer, Helen Mellors, Assistant Director of Planning, Dawn Matthews, our Committee Officer, and Leah Arthurton, who's kindly taken care of the live streaming for us. And during the course of our meeting, we will also be joined by area team managers Nigel Harris and Glenn Beaumont, who will both be presenting for us today. Before we proceed with the agenda, there are just a few items of housekeeping to run through. Firstly, filming. Members of the public are welcome to film proceedings as long as they're not disruptive to the conduct of this meeting. If anyone wishes to film or record this meeting, please can you indicate to me now? No, thank you very much. Also, please can we all ensure that our mobiles and electronic devices are switched to silent. If you must use your mobile phone whilst the committee is in session, please leave the room to do so. However, you will appreciate this may result in you not being able to vote on the matter under discussion at the point that you leave the room. In terms of public speaking, members of the public can only speak if prior arrangements have been made in accordance with the Council's scheme of public speaking. Therefore, only those who have registered to speak will be able to address the committee today. The time allocated is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker or per parish or town council. The running order will be as follows. The planning officer will present the application to committee for their consideration, followed by questions to the planning officer from members of the committee. Public speakers will then be invited to present their case, followed again by questions to public speakers from members of the committee. That is to clarify something that the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is parish town council first, followed by objectors, and finally supporters. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak for a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. This will again be followed by questions from members of the committee. Again, these questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents or photographs at this meeting. It's my intention to take a short comfort break after the first application. Are there any questions before we proceed? Stunned you into silence. Thank you. I will now move on to agenda item 1, and that is to receive declarations of interest from members. Before you jump in, I know we've all received an email from Dr. Moxon on behalf of the first application. Mary Moxon on behalf of the first application. So aside from that, Councillor Gurini-Gouvenlou.
District Councillor for Taverham on application 4.
Thank you very much. Councillor Adams.
Same again.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, item 1, the application site is in my ward, but I've had no discussion with the applicant or the parish council concerning the application. And then item 2, this application site is also in my ward and in my parish as a parish councillor for Upton with Fishley. I have had no discussion with the applicant at any time. When the original application was lodged, I voted with my fellow parish councillors against that application on grounds of highway safety concerning the vehicular access proposed at that time. Now, this revised application has been presented with a revised vehicular access proposal, and as this application has not been presented to Upton with Fishley Parish Council for discussion, I still have no discussion with the applicant, nor any discussion with any other parish councillor or our parish clerk prior to today's meeting. Concerning the application before us today, I feel able to make any potential contribution to the discussion and consider the merits of this standalone application with no unconscious bias. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brennan. Any others? No, thank you very much. That takes us on to item 2, to report apologies for absence and any substitute members. Dawn.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, apologies from Councillor Moncur. I'm not aware of any other apologies, and there are no substitutes.
Thank you very much. That takes us now on to item 3, and that's to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of December. Are there any points of accuracy, or are members happy that I sign those as a true record of the meeting? Thank you very much. All in favour? Thank you very much. I'll sign those as a true record of the meeting. Are there any item 4, any matters arising from those minutes? Councillor Adams.
Just one, and I'm not sure whether it's arising from these, but just to ask Helen, has she written to the chief planning inspector or whatever it is regarding all these refusals?
Yes, it's going out in the next couple of weeks. I haven't done it yet, but it's been drafted, ready to be signed off.
Thank you very much. Right, so that takes us on to the substance of the agenda today. Item 5, planning applications. We have 5 applications to be considered by the committee today. To minimise the disruption today to the running of the meeting and mindful of the COVID situation, I intend to reorder the items on the applications on the agenda, with those with the most public speakers going first. So the order that we'll take today will be application 1, 5, 3, 2, and then 4. So it's 1, 5, 3, 2, then 4. And obviously we'll have item 6, the appeals, at the end. Okay, thank you very much. So item 1, application 2021-1717, land at Dawson's Lane, Blowfield. That's starting on page 10 of our papers. This item will be presented by Senior Planning Officer Helen Bowman. Members, I just want to draw your attention, we have a supplementary paper for this item which has been circulated. So Helen, I'd be grateful if you could highlight the key points of that in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a 12-dwelling development in Dawson's Lane in Blowfield. I'm sure many members will be familiar with this site because it's been before us on at least 3 occasions, so it will appear familiar. Okay. This is all about the drainage system again. We have an approved off-site infiltration drainage system. You remember when the application came to committee last June, which involved some amendments to some of the house types, that some concern was raised that the infiltration basin, there was some seepage over the top a few days after the significant storms that we had just before Christmas 2020. To provide some kind of reassurance, we put a condition on that application to provide a verification report to provide additional assurance that this system was operating as it was designed to, and demonstrating that the system had been installed in accordance with the details. It also gave provision for any remedial works if they were necessary. A report has been produced by the applicant's drainage engineer, which included an investigation over a week period last July. As it stands at the moment, the development is nearly complete. We've just got one dwelling to finish, and the top coat needs to be put on the road. So it is much more complete than it was when we had the incident with the flooding. I think what is really key today is actually we're determining whether the system has been built in accordance with the agreed scheme and whether it's operating to the design standards. We're not considering the suitability of the system, which has already been agreed, that's already been approved. And what we're not doing is considering wider drainage issues either. We're actually just looking in terms of this discharge condition, whether this system is operating adequately. So just as a reminder, as we go through on these plans, here's the application site down here where the dwellings have been built. This is Blowfield Corner Road. This is the drainage ditch system here with the infiltration basin at the top. You'll note here, obviously, the surface water flow path, which is an area of risk of surface water flooding. And the terminus of the blind ditch system is located here to the north area here. So that's just a view, a little bit of context. Okay, that's the wider system on the drawing. I have got it subdivided into different sections, which you can probably see a little bit better as we go through. But basically what happens is the water goes into highway drains, which then go into an anklier water sewer, which attenuates the flow into the ditch at 21.6 litres a second. There is an attenuation basin here to cater for any overflows. Water then goes into the ditch, through a culvert under Dawson's Lane, through another ditch into the infiltration basin where it's discharged to the ground. So just going through the system, I'm just going to go through some photographs of what it's actually looking like at the moment. So this is the attenuation basin. I don't think it had any water in it. It would only ever be used in a very sharp, heavy storm. So that's not an issue that it's not been used. But it is there as an additional backup. Okay, so here we've got the system with the attenuation basin. So this is where the water discharges into the ditch, which has been constructed along the east side of Dawson's Lane. So you can see the pipe there and the ditch. The grass has been very recently cut back. As you can see, this is the ditch heading down Dawson's Lane. You can see that the vegetation is establishing in the ditch. And again, there's a close-up one up. This has all been cut back just before I took those photographs. So once it goes down the ditch, the water then goes to head wall 3, which is where the water then goes into the culvert. Now, initially when the LFFA commented on the scheme, or the remediation or the verification report, then they did suggest maybe that the winged walls of the head wall could be extended and maybe a concrete apron could be put in place. There has been further discussions with the drainage engineer and the LFFA, and the LFFA are now happy that no further remediation work is required because there hasn't been any significant erosion since the head wall was installed. The culvert is oversized. There are restricted flows into the ditch, and the soil around the culvert is cohesive in nature. So I've shown and I don't know if you can see them very well here, this is when it was installed in July 2020. This is in August 2021, and then at a slightly different angle, the situation in December 2021. So there hasn't been any significant erosion that would require us to take remedial action and do some further work at this point. I think it's important to remember that, if there is an issue in the future, then it can be picked up through the management and maintenance plan, which is in place. There's no significant silt within the culvert. There is a grill, as you can see on the photographs, which catches the larger items. The culvert is significantly oversized, so a small amount of silt in it won't block it up. There's very little risk of it getting blocked, and the management and maintenance plan covers any clearance in the future. Okay, so we now go back to the scheme where it then goes across the field in the ditch. So this is where head wall 4, where the water comes out of the culvert into the ditch. You can see here, this is the ditch crossing the field. Again, vegetation is establishing. We did have an issue with erosion where the ditch was entering the basin. As you can see on the photographs, the soil is very granular and sandy, and at this point, and was basically with a bit of a discontinuity to the ditch, was causing some significant erosion. The drainage engineer has recommended that this area was remodelled and some core matting was put down to help establish the vegetation. That work has actually been done. As you can see here, the vegetation is now in place, and I feel that that's actually resolved that issue. So we're not going to get that long-term issue. So where necessary, we have carried out the remediation. Okay. This is the infiltration basin. This is where it's entering the ditch here, or the ditch is entering the infiltration basin. This is obviously key to the operation of the surface water strategy, because this is where the water infiltrates into the ground. Now, the engineers have carried out 2 sets of building regulation infiltration tests within the basin. And what you do is you do 3 consecutive tests, which basically then simulate the situation of the saturated ground. You always there's 2 lots of tests were carried out in different locations. You always take, when designing a system, the worst test result. You don't take an average, you take the worst one, and you design on that basis. So in most cases, then the basin will probably infiltrate better than what you've designed it to. So the tests came out as being slightly better than the tests which were done prior to the development taking place. They were all within the the margins of error. You're not going to get 2 tests exactly the same, because you are dealing with natural materials. So the testing seems to indicate that the infiltration rate is working correctly. The basin was also monitored over a week period, where there were some showers and a small storm, and the basin appears to have infiltrated at the rate that we would expect. There has the blind ditch terminus is just the other side here. There has been a point raised about why the blind ditch drains quicker than the basin. Now, this has been discussed with the engineer or on site, and actually the blind ditch is a lot shallower and smaller than the actual basin, so the volume of water per surface area is much smaller, so therefore it is likely to infiltrate quicker. The infiltration rate in the testing was also slightly better in the blind ditch area, so that could also contribute to why the blind ditch infiltrates slightly quicker. I think what's also important to kind of raise is, in terms of the infiltration, it's gravity fed. So the water, it goes into the ground and then it goes downwards. It doesn't necessarily just travel to the side as a primary thing. Its focus is going down. That's why you need to do the tests at the point of where you're going to infiltrate, because it is about what's happening at that point. So in conclusion, the basin has been, or the infiltration basin has been designed to accommodate the surface water produced by the development. It has a large storage capacity for a 1 in 100 year plus climate change storm event. So it will hold the water. So it isn't expected that all the water would disappear straight away. It is a storage so that it will infiltrate over a period of time. The infiltration rates appears to be similar to what the design standard is. We've resolved the issues regarding the collapsing ditch. The ditches system appears to be operating adequately. If there is further management or work needed, then that obviously can be picked up by the management and maintenance plan. The LFFA have also visited the site as well and confirmed that the system appears to be working adequately. So therefore, the system has been built in accordance with the approved plans. It appears to be operating in accordance with the design standards. No further work is required. We would therefore recommend that the condition is discharged. As a final point, as I've mentioned before, this is an ongoing sort of living system. There will need to be maintenance in the future, and we do have a approved management and maintenance plan in place, which can be enforced as well to pick up any issues if they occur.
Thank you very much, Helen. Members, do you have any questions for Helen in respect of her presentation? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. Just confirmation, Helen. Who would, you mentioned enforcement, who would be responsible for the enforcement of the management plan or the amendment of the management plan if it becomes necessary?
We would be as a local planning authority, so it's a planning condition. So if it wasn't being managed, then we would have the ability to enforce against that.
Oh, I'll hold my finger on the button, that might work then. Thank you, Councillor Fisher, for your question. That's a very pertinent point. Thank you. Right. Oh, Councillor Karimi Gouvenou.
I just wondered, it says no consideration of extra flows from the NCC highways and Bennett's development. Where does that water go? Does that not go into this drainage system?
That water discharges into the blind ditch system. Obviously, this is an independent system. So what we are looking at today is whether this system is working, not whether there's kind of what we need to keep those wider issues separate. So any issues with those, that water goes into the system which is next door to it. It doesn't go into this system.
Sorry, I can see you now. Councillor Prutton, I believe you have a question.
Yes, can you just clarify for me your paragraph, written paragraph 5.16 about Anglian Water recently started to adopt the SUDS system. Is there any inference that we can draw today from this statement, which seems as though it's a departure from Anglian Water's customary practice? Are we to read anything into that that's significant in our decision making today?
I think what we've had back on it was a standard consultation response that they've very recently started to adopt SUDS. That occurred sort of after this was being constructed. It's quite recent. So I think basically they're putting those sort of a standard informative on all their responses, but it was never that this system was going to be adopted by Anglian Water. They've only just adopted part of the sewer, which has already been pre-agreed. There's no obligation for any SUD schemes to be adopted by Anglian Water, but there is now an option of doing where previously they didn't adopt SUD systems.
So it's not just relevant to what we're discussing today, it's a wider practice.
It's a wider, they're sort of promoting their what they now do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I'll move to the public speakers. We have a number of registered speakers for this application. Firstly, I shall invite the Stuart Smith, who's representing Blowfield Parish Council. Good morning, Mr. Smith, and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. The committee officer, Dawn, will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining. So if you'd like to proceed when you're ready. Thank you.
As a result of the LLFA response to the drainage strategy requesting that Head Rule 3 is strengthened with wider concrete side walls to prevent erosion, further information and a revised drainage strategy has been submitted by the applicant. They contend that there is no requirement to strengthen Head Wall 3 and that any changes can be made good by the maintenance and management company going forward. However, the condition makes it clear that the onus is on the applicant to ensure the drainage strategy will last for the lifetime of the development. The flow rate figures used by the applicant are not up to date, failing to take into account the changes in the house specification on the site agreed in application 2020-2164. With a number of changes already submitted, there is no confidence that the current strategy will last for the lifetime of the development, indeed, even beyond build-out completion. There is still no evidence on how the system has been altered to reflect the infiltration pond overflow incident in December 2020, as mentioned by Helen, when only 3 houses were connected. Again, contrary to NPPF paragraphs 155 and 156 and Blowfield Neighbourhood Plan ENV drainage. The failure was not a result of overland flows into the infiltration pond. Old vestigial ditches on the field further south have not shown any water capture in the last 10 years based upon local knowledge. The failure is a result of poor infiltration from the pond when the neighbouring blind ditch is full, which, although there is confirmation that both ditch and pond drain into the same sand seam by Norfolk Laboratories Partnership, infiltration testing has not occurred when both systems are full. New infiltration figures were obtained in July 2021 during a dry spell. Planning permission was given based on the Dawson's Way development being standalone and separate. Clearly not the case from the above. Also bear in mind that the road surface is not yet draining into this system, as the road drains remain below the level of the current road surface, so verification should not be sought until the system is under full load. Finally, now the admission is that the blind ditch system adversely affects the infiltration rate in the Dawson's Way pond. The additional flows in the blind ditch system, and I know Helen separate these two, the additional flows in the blind ditch system from the Bennett site to the east under construction and the reboring out of the NCC Highways road culvert beside the Bennett site mean there will be more water flowing into the blind ditch system, so the overtopping risks for the Dawson's Way system increase further. LLFA and the planning officer's report say the system appears to be working adequately. In the planning paper, section 5.18 of the planning officer's report. It is hardly an endorsement of the system which one would have expected should have a reasonable degree of contingency in their plans, so currently it would be expected that the performance should be well above adequately. Also, the results of the recent strategic flood review of the area undertaken by NCC Highways, LLFA and BDC Planning have not yet been published. So in my assessment, this application is coming to committee before this is complete and published for additional consideration. In the light of these aspects, this condition cannot be discharged at this time as the road system is not connected and the results of the flood review are not published. It would appear that common sense would suggest that until these aspects are resolved, it cannot be confirmed that the system will function as designed. Permission should be deferred at this time. Blowfield Parish Council comments on this application as a result are therefore unchanged. The verification report fails to discharge the planning condition. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for your presentation. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Councillor Beadle.
Thank you, Chair. You state that the blind ditch has an adverse effect on the infiltration pond. Could you describe that, why that is in greater detail, please?
Because both of them drain into the same sand seam. So if one is full, the infiltration in the other is going to be less. It has to be less because it's only got a finite capacity.
Chair, I would have thought if they're going to the same sand state seam, then the logic it would be that the water in both would be the same at the same time.
What it is indicating is that when both are full, which is why I made the point about no infiltration tests were done when the system was full. If you do an infiltration test on the drainage pond standalone in a dry period, you're going to get higher rates than if the ditch is full as well, because you've got a capacity for a lot more water into the same outlet.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Beadle?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Helen, I believe you wanted to say something.
I think we obviously have done the tests, and you do the three tests consecutively to simulate the situation of it being saturated soil. So you would get far more water going into that area of soil than you would in a normal rainfall event, because it's very concentrated. So you can't carry out an infiltration test when there's water in a ditch or a basin, because basically what the test does is, in very basic terms, digs a hole, and it's then how long a specified amount of water takes to drain from that system. So if you've got other water in there, you're not going to know how long your specified amount of water is draining. So you can't do it within a full basin. That's why there's this British standard and sort of industry good practice that you do these 3 consecutive tests to do that. In terms of how the sand seam kind of works, infiltration obviously is kind of gravity fed, that the water will immediately go downwards rather than to the side. I think the drainage engineer who's here today will probably be able to provide us with a little bit more technical explanation of how that sun seam kind of works with two sort of infiltration areas working.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any further questions for Mr. Smith? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. That now moves us on to the objectors, and we have Dr. Moxon here with us today. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Moxon.
Okay, good morning. One thing, I understood that Councillor Thomas had sent a representation in. That I don't know which order that goes in.
She has, and that will come at the end.
At the end, thank you. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So just to remind you, you have 5 minutes to address the committee, and the committee officer will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining. So if you'd like to proceed when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully this will work. Good morning to you all. Sort of Groundhog Day is a month away, but we're here a month early. This application is to sign off the drainage strategy and identify any remediation required for long-term functioning of the system. We believe it fails to do this. The officer's report states the drainage system appears to be working correctly, echoed by the LLFA. This fails to confirm the system will work for the lifetime of the development in breach of MPPF 159. A significant volume of site surface water from the roads is not yet connected into the system. The officer states that the housing site will produce more runoff whilst being developed, but this water source that's not connected flows down the private lane towards number 76. It is outside of the system. This system failed in December 20 with only 3 houses connected when the infiltration pond overtopped. Going back, this drainage strategy was approved in November 19. This was altered at the last minute and further information was sent to the LPA, but not wholly disclosed in the officer's report. The committee was misled. At that time, paragraph 5.24 of the report stated the system would be completely separate from the existing ditch network and the area at risk from surface water flooding. Evidence from Norfolk laboratories that the infiltration pond site and the blind ditch were of the same substrate, i.e. directly linked, was not mentioned. MPPF 160 was ignored. The blind ditch with recorded flooding events had already been approved for surface water discharge from Bennett's development of 36. The planning officer's report, paragraph 5.27 in November 19, stated the LLFA had given incorrect advice on the 36, but still insisted the 2 systems were separate. The Dawson's Way strategy was approved in breach of MPPF 160. It is stated in the current officer's report, paragraph 5.10, that the whole area is linked. So the infiltration pond is penetrating into an area of high surface water flood risk, zone 4. When the blind ditch is full, the infiltration rate in the pond decreases significantly. As a result, during wet spells, infiltration almost stops in the pond and successive rainfall is added to the existing water. The water level only starts to fall when the blind ditch fully empties. The verification report offers no remediation for long-term sustainability on this point, MPPF 160. There are further omissions in the planning officer's report. The agent uses an unrelated area to justify saturation of the infiltration pond field and effects upon infiltration. That is misleading. The report states that the rudimentary rainfall calculations are not relevant, yet the agent relies upon these to justify the infiltration efficiency of the pond. The claim the culvert is self-cleansing is based upon cursory observations at each end. The culvert is some 50 metres long. The grill at the entrance is poorly sited, allowing debris to easily flow underneath it. The lack of significant debris exiting suggests build-up within. This has not been investigated. The report states that the ditch sides are vegetated, minimal after 2 years. Slumping is clearly evident along the ditch walls throughout the system. It will continue and worsen. Remediation at the entrance to the infiltration pond was enforced in 2021 after the ditch completely collapsed, blocking the flow of water. The planning office refused to delay this application until after the ongoing strategic flood investigation relevant to this area is published. At the same time, the Dawson's Way system is not fully functional and is linked to previous flooding events. The report states no remediation is required for long-term sustainability and the management company will take over any future work, paragraph 5.18. There has been no compliance with the maintenance plan since construction. Maintenance is only undertaken when notified by the LPA or prior to an inspection. The Dawson's Way drainage strategy is not fully functioning as designed. The significant issues I've highlighted are ignored or dismissed in the conclusion of the report. The system must be compliant with the MPPF. At this point, it is not. Please don't rush the decision. Defer until all evidence is available and the system is draining all areas in the design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moxon. Do we have any questions for Dr. Moxon? No. I've just got one following up the point raised about the strategic flood review, the results of that. Could somebody tell me when they will be published? Do we know?
I think there's possibly a slight confusion here. The LFFA, who have a statutory duty to investigate any flooding of property, published a report in August of last year regarding flooding to properties in the floods in just before Christmas. That did recommend that some highway investigations were carried out. They're in the process of doing that and looking at some of the highway issues. There isn't going to be a strategic review of the drainage system. We do have a letter to the parish and the MP, which we're in the process of responding to, but there is no strategic review of the system that's going to be published.
Thank you, Helen, for that. So are there no further questions? No. Okay. That now brings us to our last speaker on this application, and that's Mr. Hooper. Good morning and welcome, Mr. Hooper. I understand you are speaking on behalf of the agent in support of the application. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, and as before, our committee officer will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining. So if you'd like to start when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be brief. Obviously, you've heard speakers here today reiterating things that have already been submitted in writing to the officer and been addressed by the officer very comprehensively in consultation with your statutory consultee, who is the LLFA. There's been lots of points raised that sound like they're technical issues, and obviously I can't rebut all of those in a few minutes because each one takes a lot longer to answer than it does to make the accusation or the point in the first place. But obviously I can answer those in more detail if you have any questions that you would like to ask. I'm more than happy to go through any of those points and explain in detail to complement what Helen has already said about how those points have been addressed and been shown not to be valid or not relevant to this application. And aside from that, there isn't really much more that I can say at the present time, aside to again remind you that this application, including all the points that have been raised by the objectors, have been addressed in detail. They have been addressed by your officer in consultation with your statutory consultee, the lead local flood authority, and all of those points have been addressed both to the satisfaction of your officers and the lead local flood authority. Again, if you want any further clarification on any particular technical issues, I can address those in more detail if you ask me specific questions. So I'll return to the chair and open it up to yourselves if you have any further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hooper. So this is now our opportunity to ask any questions that we may have. Councillor Ward first.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Hooper, when the pond overtopped in 2020, what exactly caused that, and has that been remedied so that will not happen again, please?
Yes, so the investigations that we had showed evidence that additional water that wasn't generated by the site was entering the system. The pond is located adjacent to the end of the blind ditch, which is a natural low point that serves a very wide area that is much greater than the site itself. And we identified evidence of water coming from both the area of land between the site and the infiltration basin, which is a few hundred meters distance away from the main site, and also from a large area that's being used by the developer of the field next to the site, where runoff was coming off that, which now currently isn't, now that the site is, the field has been returned to agricultural use. So effectively it was serving a much greater area. I know the point has been made that there are only 3 properties connected, but the ability of water to get into the basin was not purely related to how many properties were actually present on the site. It's down to water flowing under gravity, and water will make its own way to the low point just by the laws of physics. And if you have a large enough area, and an area larger than the basin was initially designed for, that will result in what was seen in December. Since then, measures have been put in place to ensure that those areas do not now drain into the basin, one of which has been occurred because the area of land has been returned to agricultural use, and the second because a small bund has been placed around the top of the basin, actually sort of some distance away, and again Helen can confirm this, to ensure that water that is not part of the development does not enter the basin, which is designed specifically for the development, but enters the ground naturally through the surrounding area.
Thank you. Helen, did you want to add anything to that? No. Okay. And Councillor Creamy Gouvenlou.
How many houses eventually will be served by this system?
Oh, it's probably best for me to come in on that. 12. 12. So it's nearly complete. So we've just got one dwelling to finish, and the road surface, the final top layer has to go on just before occupation.
Okay, right, thanks.
Mike, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Beadle, I believe you have a question.
Yes, Chair. On the basis that we don't have the drainage engineer to ask directly, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you. The blind ditch, we had a photograph of some slippage of soil from the wall of the ditch into the bottom of the ditch. From what I could see of it, this looks as if it was caused by water seeping out of the bank into the base of the ditch, which is colloquially called in the building trade running sand. So the water table is higher, or the water level is higher. Couldn't avoid the word table. The water level in the ground surrounding the blind ditch is higher than in the ditch itself. So the soaking away of the water in the blind ditch is better elsewhere in the blind ditch than it is actually at that point where the bank slips. If that is, and everybody seems to agree because it's not been denied, that all the blind ditch and the pond are draining into the same substrate, then that implies that the water level in the surrounding the pond will also on occasion get higher. And I do take the officer's point that you can't make a soakaway test if there's already standing water. But if there's standing water, then that also reinforces the point that the water in the ground is higher than in the both areas which are deemed to be allowing for the water to soak away. So what work can be done to actually stop this? Because I am actually very uneasy with this, very uneasy. I have actually seen systems like this fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beadle. Invite Mr. Hooper to respond.
Sorry. The simple answer, I'm afraid, is that you're incorrect. The scouring, the photos didn't show it entirely clearly, but there are 2 very localized patches of pure sand, which is highly granular and very easily washed away. So you can't quite see from the shape, but the two scour points were caused by eddying of the flow as it gets to that point. There's actually a slight increase in gradient as the ditch drops down into the basin. So there's an acceleration which causes more turbulence in the flow, and it's quite obvious. I think Helen could probably confirm the circular shape of the scour was clearly caused by eddying that then undermined the bank and flow in. There's no evidence to suggest that there was lateral hydraulic flow within the substrate from the ditch coming from the natural ditch coming into the new ditch and then falling into the basin. There's simply no evidence for that. Everything that we saw on site indicated that it was caused by eddying within the ditch, scouring out those patches of sand which were highly mobile. The groundwater level is within the chalk that underlies the clay. There isn't a groundwater issue here. It's not a question of there being fluctuations in groundwater level. The issues that have been commented, and I think Helen has already addressed this, about the ditch draining quicker than the basin is simply a measure of level. The ditch is sitting at a higher level. Water, as it drains down into the soil, as Helen has said, they're both draining down vertically. If the base level of the ditch is higher, as that water level drains down, the ditch is going to empty first, purely by virtue of the fact that the base of the ditch is at a higher level than the ditch that drains into the basin and the basin itself. It's just a geometry issue. So there is no groundwater issue, there is no lateral flow issue, there is no issue of water running from the ditch laterally and entering the side walls of the ditch into the basin. And in any case, that scour has been remediated and is currently now well established with vegetation. The issue, as your officer has pointed out, and as the LLFA have confirmed, the remediation has been done and they don't see that there's a continuing issue.
Councillor Beadle, I understand you want to come back?
Yes, please. I'm not a hydrologist. Are you a hydrologist?
I'm the civil engineer, the design engineer, yeah. So my expertise is in behaviour of fluids.
Good. All I can say is, in my view, that is not the slippage, the slumping is not as a result of scouring. And you will also know that the water level in land varies very quickly, or can vary very quickly, depending on numerous factors. And has there been in wet periods ground tests to see where the water level in the ground is in and around these areas?
So there are two issues there. There's the groundwater. The groundwater is within the chalk that underlies the clay, that underlies the sand. It's at significant depth. It's where the water is drawn that you drink from. If you look on the Anglian water mapping, you'll see where the boreholes where they draw that out of. So groundwater is a separate issue. Obviously, you have water within soil. Rain comes down from the sky, it lands on the ground, soaks into the ground. As Helen said, it largely migrates vertically downwards. In some occasions, it does migrate laterally. So at any point in time, you can dig a hole and you can find some level of moisture. What there's no evidence for in here, either in long-term boreholes from the BGS or in any of the infiltration testing or trial pitting that's been undertaken, that there is any ability for this particular piece of ground to hold standing water at a particular level. The material that we're infiltrating into is highly granular and has been shown using the industry standing testing methods to be suitable for what we are using it for. Again, that's been assessed by your consultee in the lead local flood authority, and they have concurred with the opinion that we've put forward. So again, I know that sometimes people might have an intuition about certain technical aspects, but again, We have presented the case based on the evidence that we've had. That case has been looked at by your statutory consultee, who are your technical experts, and they have concurred that what we have produced has been appropriate. And I'm not sure what more I can say than that.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the speaker? No. I've just got one, if I may, Mr. Hooper. We've heard concerns about the point in time when the drainage tests were undertaken, with it being a dry spell we've heard. Just wondered what the choice of choosing that particular time of year was, and is there any reassurance that you can give us regards to those tests?
So as Helen has already pointed out, if a basin is full of water, you can't get into it to do an infiltration test. So you need to have a period of time where you can allow at least 3 days of dry weather, which generally means undertaking those tests during the drier months. Obviously, it's a circular argument almost. As Helen has pointed out, all of these testing procedures require measures to saturate the soil and therefore take a reading that is based on saturated soil. So it becomes irrelevant whether the soil has been saturated naturally previously by rainfall. If it hasn't, the testing methodology itself replicates that situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hooper. Are there any further questions? No, I can't see any. That brings us to the local member section. We have received an email from the local member for Blowfield, Councillor Justine Thomas, who unfortunately is unable to join us today, but she has emailed in some words that Helen's going to share with us. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm, I'm reading the comments of Councillor Justine Thomas. The application relates to land in an area in Blowfield that has multiple issues with water drainage. The National Policy Framework, paragraph 155, says not development which is made in areas at risk of flooding should be made safe for its lifetime without increasing the flood risk elsewhere. The Planning Committee should consider deferring this application until the site is complete. I'm not sure how one can say how the drainage system is working to an acceptable civil standard when the development hasn't been completed. The road is not complete at the moment. It is not fully surfaced. I have seen myself that surface water from the road is not flowing into the drainage system. I have noticed some comments from a local resident that I would have to say I do agree with, having visited the site myself on various occasions. For example, vegetation is not, in my opinion, well established. It's pretty sparse. I can't see how that's going to improve any time in the future, given that it's been there for about 2 years. It would seem that it's reached the limit of its propensity to self-propagate. I also agree that the grill at Headwall 3 is too high to really have much use. I'm sure it will keep out a small animal, but I can't see it keeping out anything else. I would also agree that water on the field to the east of Dawson's Lane either puddles or moves south to north, not east, west as specified. The filtration pond has already overtopped when there were only 3 houses connected to the system. Explanations have been given for this. One rain event alone may not cause the pond to overtop. However, in December 2020, the overtopping was after multiple rain events. It seems a crucial point that the fact that the filtration pond and the blind ditch drain into the same sand seam means there will be an adverse impact on water flows into the neighbouring blind ditch system. The committee needs to take into account NCC highways have rebored the surface water road culvert to prevent flooding at Blowfield Corner, and that water is also flowing into the blind ditch. Also, the neighbouring site known as Bennett's is going to discharge into the same blind ditch when the houses are built. It is fundamentally important for the committee to remember that the 36-house development on Blowfield Corner Road was approved based on advice from the LFA at it later admitted was incorrect. The advice means that the drainage strategy for the development means that the water will flow into the blind ditch. The blind ditch is known Zone 4 flood area. I would ask the committee to consider deferring approval of this application until a later date when everything is complete, will provide more time to see the system is working and ensure that further flooding elsewhere is avoided. End of email.
Thank you very much, Helen. Has any members got any comments on that email they've just heard? No? Okay. That brings us to the public speaking to an end. Thank you, speakers, for attending. We will now discuss this application as a committee, and after which the committee will determine the application. So I'll now open it up to the floor for questions and debate. If there is any. Councillor Beadle.
Thank you, Chair. I think the speaker for the applicant has damned himself, because he said cannot do a test if the ground is full of water. If the ground is full of water, then how is water going to soak away into it? It's as simple as that. I just think we've got to delay this approval until it's actually been proven tested in real time. It's, you know, I just feel that this is, we ought to give it the benefit of the doubt by postponing it, but postponing the decision, and I so propose, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beadle. I've got Councillor Adams followed by Councillor Greamy-Gouvenlou.
Yeah. For once, I agree with Stuart or Councillor Beadle, and having listened to what Justine says, and I take great note of what Justine says, because she knows what she's talking about, as most of us do, and I think it's premature. The thing that concerns me is that the 5.18 says it appears to be working adequately. Well, I got a new machine over Christmas, which at the moment appears to be working adequately, but that comes with a 2-year guarantee that should anything go wrong with it, that in fact you can have it repaired free of charge. And that's my view on this one. That anything that appears to be working adequately at the moment doesn't mean to say it's going to work adequately in 12 months' time. So I agree with Stuart. He didn't put a time period on how long we should defer it for, but I would say, you know, you've got to give it time for when it gets really wet. We've had major issues in Horsford, which is I'm the county councillor for, and very much sort of a system not dissimilar to this one, and that has hit severe flooding problems when it has rained really heavily and for a prolonged period. So yes, I agree with Stuart that we defer it and that we give it 12 months and then review it again at the end of the period of 12 months. Because as I said, just to say it appears to be working adequately without actually being absolutely sure that it will continue to work adequately, I think this is premature to discharge this condition at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. I've got a number of people indicating to speak. I've firstly got Councillor Greamy-Gouvenlou, and then I've got Helen, and then I've got Councillor Ward and Councillor Fisher. So, Caroline, you first.
Thank you, Chair. I would be very uneasy to approve this discharge of conditions until all 12 houses are built and are fully functional, and until the roads are completed. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Helen, I believe you wanted to respond.
I think the key point is obviously we've put in the condition a trigger, because actually once the development's complete, then it's complete. We can't sort of be going back 12 months later, because actually it will then be passed over to the management company. The developer won't be on site. It will be passed over to the management company. There is an ongoing requirement for the management and maintenance of the scheme. So in some ways, it's a bit like having that warranty on the scheme, that if something does go wrong with it, then it does need to be resolved. So it's not a case of this is the end of the situation. If something goes wrong in the future, then it won't be dealt with. There is that ongoing requirement, but it's important, I think, that we make a decision at the moment prior to the occupation and the moving over to the management company while the developer's still on site.
Can I just say, I think my argument was we can't really make a decision yet until all the 12 houses are built and it's fully functioning. So we need to defer this until a later date.
Can I just add to that? Because the requirement of the condition was the verification as to whether the drainage system had been built and is operating correctly to the design standards. It has been tested to show that it can operate to the required design standards, and that's what we're looking at today. This application had the most scrutiny of any surface water drainage application I have ever seen, because of the complexity of it and because obviously of the concerns that have been raised. We have got confirmation from the lead local flood authority that it has been designed correctly and as per the approved scheme, and has gone through that measures to look at. So we are satisfied from your technical consultees that that condition has been met, because we're not looking at the suitability of the system, which has already been approved. It's whether that approved scheme has been correctly built to the standards that we approved, and the testing that has been carried out in accordance with the required standards. Although they were carried out in July, it meets the British standards. They are acceptable. I just need to re-emphasise that fact and what we're looking at today.
Thank you, Helen. We now have Councillor Ward, followed by Councillor Fisher. So Councillor Ward first.
Thank you, Chairman. I think my question has largely been answered. I was going to ask about guarantees. If we approve this today and then something does go wrong, will it be put right? And I think the officer has said that that would be the case. So on that basis, I don't see any benefit in deferring this at all. And I would like to go along with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Just hear from Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I would have liked to have read that the local flood authority was confident the system would work, rather than just saying it appears to work. But on the other hand, when you look at the conditions that are in front of us, which just says that actually the roof of the last property shall not be completed until a verification report is demonstrated. So we can't wait until the 100-year event happens, which would be nice, I agree. And we can't necessarily wait until the final building is completed and the road is topped, because now they're the last things to do. What the condition says is that we need to approve and discharge this condition when or prior to the last roof being on. So hence, that's what we're faced today. And I believe I'm happy to support the recommendation on that, as I would have much sooner have had the local flood authority confirm. But I think where we are, the management plan for the system, when you read that, is pretty thorough. And we are the backup enforcement agency. So I'm happy to second Councillor Ward's proposal. Thank you.
Okay, we seem to have two proposals on the table. I've got Councillor Prutton first.
Carrying on from what Caroline said, there's a business about the final topping of the road. I accept what you say, Councillor Fisher, about the roof. When does the end actually happen? But on the other hand, if you're going to wait for the roof to go on and the final surface for the road to go on, and then only at that point is the surface water from the road going to go into the final flow. And I think it's a disappointment that that cannot be done before the final decision is made.
Can I just come in here? I think what's key is when we put on you can put the final surface of the road on. The real testing point would be the significant storm event. Now that might not happen for a couple of years, so I think we have to make a decision now. We can't keep this ongoing, and if what we're saying we actually want to we have to make a decision as to whether this is working now, because we don't actually know when that event will be happening. Putting the road surface on isn't going to test the system in a significant event. It will be that significant event that does it.
And that would be unreasonable to wait for that time, because we wouldn't ask for any of those other schemes that we grant all the time for any system to be tested. This is the first time we've added a condition like this to ensure we wanted to guarantee that what had been designed was then implemented on the ground, designed to that standard. The testing that's been done does show that the design standards have been met for when all the 12 houses have been built, for when the road surface is on. So they have all been carried out and tested. There will be flooding in the future, because we can't, there will be flooding on schemes in the district. What it is it's been designed to account for those flooding events, and no houses should be flooded. So that's what's been carried out. We're satisfied that's been met. I do agree with Helen that there isn't going to be deferring it until the last house has been built on the road surface. You will come up with the same conclusions, because the testing has been carried out to verify that the scheme has been put in as per the approved scheme.
Thank you, Helen. I actually have a question. I share some of the concerns that have been raised about, I'd feel more reassured if the wording from the LLFA was stronger. If it was a confidence thing rather than appearing to be working adequately, which makes me a little bit nervous. My question is, and it's linked with a comment that Councillor Justine Thomas had made, and also our previous speakers, and it's the impact of the other development, the Bennett's development, with this. Am I not correct in assuming that, sorry, there's a double negative. Am I correct in assuming that the LLFA looks at all of these holistically to make sure that we don't have a drainage problem? Or are they all being looked at individually and we don't yet know if there will be one?
We are considering what's happening on the Bennett site. The Bennett site is being attenuated to greenfield runoff rate. So water obviously goes into that ditch from that site anyway at greenfield runoff rate. The scheme attenuates still to that. So in fact, it won't make the situation better, but it won't make it any worse. So there'll be water going off that site, but there is that at the moment. There's also discussions going on with highways, which may lead to some attenuation of the water going into that ditch. There isn't a final scheme at the moment, so that's still being looked at. But that's a separate issue that's being looked at, so that the water with the Bennett scheme isn't going to increase into the ditch. It will just stay the same, because it will be attenuated on the site.
And just going back to that point, each scheme has to ensure its greenfield runoff rate isn't exceeded, so there is no increase in flood from what the existing situation is. And that's really key to each consideration of each application on its own merits. So it's dealing with the surface water from your site can be managed and isn't increasing the existing runoff rate from that prior to the development. So in theory, it shouldn't be any worse than the current situation.
Sorry, can I just double check my understanding on that? So when the Bennett site is built out, I'm just thinking of the management and maintenance plan for this site. When the Bennett site is built out, if it then has an impact on the Dawson site, do the homeowners of that site then have to pick up the cost of that impact?
I think what we're saying is the same amount of the same discharge rate will occur as what is occurring at the moment. So being a field next to the ditch, and that water on the green field goes into the ditch, is going to be attenuated, so it's going off at the same rate. So the situation won't be any worse than it is at the moment. It will be exactly the same.
Okay, I think I've gone as far as I can with that one. Councillor Creamy Gouvenlou.
Sorry, me again. Helen, you said there will be flooding on that site if there is a torrential downpour. Where is that water going to go? Is it going to go in the houses, or is it going to go on a field?
I'll let Helen explain that. That's why we have service water, and that's why we have the 1 in 100. So there will be events where there will be a significant rainfall, and we need to ensure that we have a system that can accommodate that. So I'll just let Helen explain that.
Okay, so it's been designed to the 1 in 100 year plus 40% climate change event, which is the standard event. What obviously occurred at Christmas, and I do have some photographs if you want to see. It actually, the seepage over the top actually occurred a few days after the main event, which just involved some water going onto the grass adjacent to the basin. So in terms of harm, that was quite limited, really. It didn't flood anyone's property. In fact, the basin probably held water back. So what I can do is I have got some extra photographs here. So this is the basin on Christmas Eve, the year before, 2020. There's the blind ditch system on the 24th, which is overtopped. Again, the 25th, Christmas Day, water still all in the basin. I think that's 26. We've just got a small amount of water, if you see, that has just gone onto the grass. So it hasn't flooded anybody's property or anything like that, and any flows from the blind ditch have also sort of resolved. So it hasn't caused any significant issues to or flooded anybody's personal sort of house or anything.
Okay, so when all the houses are built, can you guarantee that none of that water will be going in anybody's gardens or in their houses when all 12 houses are built?
I don't think we could guarantee 100%, but that's the same with absolutely any scheme. So
we can't.
Yeah.
You are being devil's advocate, and we could never say that because obviously we can't predict what a rainfall event will do. What we can and we should ensure through the planning system is that the existing rainfall runoff rate isn't exceeded. There is a scheme designed to address all the required standards set by national planning policy framework and the government. And in our opinion, having consulted with our technical consultee, the Lead Local Flood Authority, this scheme meets that. This scheme has been designed, has been input as per the verification condition we wanted to put on, in addition to what we had previously to ensure the scheme, we had some checks along the way to ensure what they said was going to be put in and designed as per the required standard had actually been put in and tested. That has been carried out.
Thank you very much. You've summed it up very nicely for me. I was about to do that, though. Thank you. Councillor Beadle, last question, and then.
Well, it's not actually a question. It's a comment on what the planning officer said. She said that when the overtopping occurred, it was a couple of days after the event. The stormwater running down the pipes would have been into that blind ditch long before 2 days. So if the peak was 2 days later, the only way that extra water is getting into that blind ditch is from the ground itself. So the ground is actually full of water, The water's going from the ground into the blind ditch. It's not going from the blind ditch into the ground. The ground was completely saturated and it needed time then to drain away naturally because water's getting into the ground from other sources. And so the blind ditch is not capable of fulfilling the needs of the area which what drains into it, because the groundwater is higher than the blind ditch. And coming back to what the speaker for the applicant was saying, the water in the chalk is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. He himself said there's a clay seam between the sandy soil and the chalk. What is happening in the chalk is irrelevant to what's happening in this blind ditch. So, Chair, I still think this is very, very, very iffy at best.
Thank you, Councillor Beadle. Given the concerns, I can see Councillor Adams wanted to speak. I think it's good that we discuss it further.
Just very quickly, Madam Chairman. Thank you. I hate to disagree with my esteemed friend, Councillor Fisher, and with Helen, but we keep talking about 100-year events. With climate change, this is going to become a more and more frequent event of heavy downpours over a prolonged period. And I'm still not at all satisfied. I hear everything that the officers have said, but I still believe that it is premature at this time to discharge this condition. And so therefore, Chairman, I'm still backing what Stewart's proposal to refuse on those grounds that, given climate change, more frequent downpours, it is really, and looking at that, I think just more reinforces my concerns, to be honest with you. But yeah, no, sorry, I'm still sticking with my seconding Stewart's proposal that we defer this. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. I will now draw this to a close. So, Councillor Beadle, you are proposing that we defer this application. Do you?
Indeed. And I'll accept Councillor Adams's suggested timetable.
Can we just confirm that timetable? I'm not sure
Yeah,
what that
and
is.
so Councillor Adams, you said you were seconding that deferral, and you added a time
for 12 months. I think you've got to give it time for all weather conditions to be able to assess it in 12 months' time. I'm not saying that we don't discharge this condition sometime in the future, but I don't think even the local flood authority is completely convinced that this system is going to work adequately. That's why they're saying it's working okay at the moment. And, that's the thing that worries me. But yeah, so the 12 months, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. So, members, we have a.
Can I just make a point on that?
I'm afraid we're going to have to go to the vote on that first, and then see what.
We haven't clarified how we're changing the condition. Unfortunately, we can't. I'm really sorry to interrupt because I think there's a technicality here. The roof of the last property is not completed. It's not occupied, but the roof is on. It was submitted before the roof was completed, the verification report. So I think if you are deferring it for 12 months, we have to accept that property is completed, and therefore vary the condition to allow for that, because otherwise they're not conforming to the condition. So I think there is an element that we need to just look at. That is not just a point of deferring the test, because the roof of the last property has already been completed.
Yeah, the roof, they're just doing the fit out, and I'm pretty certain that the property has been sold. So people will be waiting to occupy it.
So I would suggest, if I may, if the application is to be deferred, that the properties can be occupied, because that's what you want to be tested, and the road completed, but the verification report comes back in 12 months. So you're not saying those properties cannot be occupied. Yes, I just need, because at the moment the condition is worded in a way, I just wanted that clarification. So what you're saying is the deferral of the verification report is 12 months, accepting, and I think this is really important, that the property is occupied and the road is finished, and then that is come back to be verified.
Thank you, Helen, for
as proposed, I'll accept that, Chair.
Yeah,
I'm happy to accept that as the seconder as well. Thank you, Helen.
Because otherwise we're not in a position to enforce that condition, because it's already in breach, and it's really
very helpful
important.
intervention. Thank you.
Helen, thank you very much for interrupting me on that. That was a good call. Now we need to make sure that condition is reworded. And I've heard from Councillor Beadle and Councillor Adam, proposer and seconder, that they accept that amendment. So, as I say, we have a proposal before us, which is a deferral of this approval for 12 months, subject to the amendment that Helen has just said. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Chairman.
All those against?
1, 2.
Any abstentions?
9 that were accounted for.
Okay, thank you. So that's been carried. We have approved a deferral of that discharge of conditions for 12 months. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions there. Thank you, speakers, for joining us in your time today. I will now adjourn the meeting for a 10-minute comfort break. We will return at 11:05. Thank you very much. The meeting. We said that we would take item application 5 next, which is 2021-1898 Orchard Farm, Hindleveston, Guestwick. So if I can invite the two speakers to come forward, please. 49. Right, this application will be presented by Area Planning Manager Glenn Beaumont. Thank you very much, Glenn. If I can invite you to start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So this is an application to change the use of land from agricultural to allow for a single glamping pod with a new access onto the highway at Orchard Farm, Hindleveston Road in Guestwick. The application is before you at the request of Councillor Peck for the reasons given in the report, and there's no further updates provided in your supplementary schedule. Key considerations are the principle of development, the impact on the character and appearance of the area, impact on highway safety, impact on residential amenity, and the location of the site. Now, if we start with the slide on the screen now, an aerial view shows very clearly that the site is in a rural location. Got Guestwick just here to the south, south-southeast. Off the screen, we've got Fulsham about 4 miles to the southwest and Melton Constable about 4 miles to the north. Site, as we'll see later, the site comprises a bungalow largely in red brick and an agricultural building with an area of hard standing in between, with access from Hindleveston Road to the east. And we can see with the red dots, the one on the left-hand side is the position of the proposed glamping pod, and the new access serving it is on very clearly labelled there as well. It shows a bit more detail, the route of the access leading to the pod, and we'll see an aerial view in just a sec, which is perhaps a bit more helpful in showing how the site will sit within its context. It's a zoomed out photo showing the application site and the land within the applicant's ownership. You can see that they own a substantial portion of agricultural land to the north and west of the site. And this block plan here shows the access with the visibility displays to the north and south. Highways hasn't objected, subject to the imposition of a number of conditions. And then if we look at the elevations, it's a curved shape building which will accommodate 4 people. And then as we move on to the aerial photos, can you see them okay? Are they looking all right? Okay, this is from the south. We've got the existing bungalow on the left-hand side, and the arrow clearly shows the position of the proposed access, just in the distance on the left-hand side of the road. And then as we move to the north of the application site, we can see the position of the glamping pod just about where this tree is here, existing dwelling on the left-hand side. Agricultural field through which the access will run in front of us, which I gather occasionally is used for grazing sheep. And then a slightly more long distance view from the north. I'll try and zoom in a bit more on that so the photo takes up more of the slide. Ooh, too much. There we go. So we've got the agricultural building, this block here, and the bungalow on the left-hand side. Oh, that's a better photo, yeah. Again, just showing that the pod will be positioned just almost in line with, in terms of this photo, on the right-hand side of the agricultural building. So this is within the garden of the existing bungalow, pod on the left-hand side. And then this is between sort of the back end of the garden leading into that area of hard standing between the house, between the bungalow and the agricultural building. Pod on the right-hand side. As I said at the top of the presentation, there's a number of items to consider. Obviously, the recommendation is to refuse, and one of those reasons is the very principle of development. And policy E3 of the local plan is key in this regard. The report sets out what that policy says, but by way of confirmation, It states that new tourist accommodation will be permitted outside of settlement limits where it has been adequately demonstrated that a site-specific demand for the accommodation exists and that the enterprise will be financially viable. The supporting text to the policy explains further that the proposals for tourist accommodation in the countryside will be justified if they are permitted by way of a specific need for that type of accommodation in that particular location. For example, at a fishing lake or something like that. So if you're minded to approve this application, you need to be persuaded that there is a specific demand for this type of accommodation in this location. Now, as officers, we recognise and set out in the report that there's going to be acceptable impacts on the appearance of the area, residential amenity and highway safety. But going by the wording of that policy, we're not convinced that there is a specific need for this type of accommodation in this specific location. And the report explains that further. In addition to that, the remote location of the site suggests that people will be highly reliant on their private motor vehicles to access a range of visitor facilities and services within the area. For example, we've got the coast, which is about 9.5, 10 miles away, Pensthorpe, the same distance, Norwich, 15 miles away. And so we don't consider the site to be in a great location. And taking account of these kind of in principle concerns, on balance, we don't consider the application complies with the policies of the development plan, and particularly 1 and 6 of the Joint Core Strategy and GC4 and E3 of the Development Management Document, and thus the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Open up to questions. Members, do you have any questions for Glenn? Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Glenn, you mentioned in your report paragraph 5 of the planning inspector's decision. I take it that as these pods are now being built, that in fact the planning inspector allowed or overturned the original decision of refusal. Am I correct in assuming that?
Is this 5.20 of the report? That was for a dwelling as opposed to holiday accommodation.
But you've included it, so you must feel that has some relevance to this particular application if it isn't to do with the pods. I take it the pods have got planning permission that are there already.
There are no pods in place.
Right, so this is just a separate pod altogether.
This is a brand spanking new application. There are no pods on site already. It's for a new pod.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Ward first. Councillor Ward.
Thank you. I think it's relevant, but if you could please tell us what type of farm this is. I know you mentioned a few sheep, but what other things do they do there, and what is the agricultural building used for, please?
The applicant is here, so he may be able to assist with that, but my understanding is that it's used for, was a former grain store, perhaps? Yeah.
You happy with that?
I just wonder if there are any other animals besides sheep on the farm.
No, I don't believe there are, no.
No, okay. Got Councillor Creamy Gouvenou.
I recently spent a weekend away at a little log cabin in the middle of a field near Kirsted, and I needed a car to get there. I find some of these policies a bit outdated. A lot of these little individual glamping sites are coming very, very popular now, and I think we should be encouraging businesses to diversify. Do you not think so?
Well, we have the planning policies in front of us to work with, and that's what we need to assess our applications with, and that's why the application is before you today at the request of Councillor Peck for you to consider the merits of it.
I just find it a bit outdated sometimes.
Okay. Any further questions for Glenn? No? Well, at this point, I'll invite Mr. Edward Plum, the applicant, who's here with us today. Good morning and welcome. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. The committee officer door will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining, so please do proceed when you're ready.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to speak. The rationale behind our application is to replace the income lost to the farm from the phasing out of direct subsidy and reintroduce a diversified income coupled with the additional employment opportunity for my wife, who runs personal training and fitness classes from home around her caring obligations for our son. The proposed site is adjacent the former Midland and Great Northern Railway line, which we often have people asked to walk or research for historic interest. The proposal provides us an opportunity to capture that interest as a unique selling point, as well as offering birdwatching opportunities over Hindle Weston Wood, which is an ancient woodland, and walking and cycling opportunities around the farm and Quiet Lane network. We note the committee report suggests that rural network is not conducive to walking or cycling. On the contrary, we find the quiet rural roads are best place for these activities, as opposed to busier town roads. We've received no objections from any local or statutory consultee and received support from our ward member and the parish council chairwoman. In addition, the emerging Guestwick neighbourhood plan reports that residents in the 65 plus age groups are likely to double over the planned period, and that it is essential to provide rural employment opportunities to enable younger families like us to remain in the village to maintain a healthy demographic, and our application hopes to do just that. Furthermore, the report provided by Destination Research concludes that the proposal is financially viable and that there is a need and demand for this type of unique on-farm accommodation in the locality. In terms of financial viability, it is important to note that our model demonstrates viability at 51% occupancy, i.e. 26 weeks of the year, not 52 weeks as the committee report suggests. I'm also conscious of a relatively recent application at Grove Farm in Hayden, which received approval for a scheme 4 times larger than ours, despite a number of constraints and objections, specifically highways. Our proposal has very similar outcomes, but without a highways objection, carries local support, and is distinct in its offering, so it does not conflict or compete. We recognise that we're in the open countryside. We are a farm, and that's a unique selling point for holiday accommodation, where rural tranquility and the extensive on-farm walks can make for a relaxing break. We don't want to produce a menagerie of uncontrolled pop-up camping, but do something quality, viable, and proportionate, demonstrating the best of Broadland. The application also presents value-added opportunities, employment opportunity and marriage value with Emily's fitness classes to create a unique yet small well-being business for her. To help mitigate concerns, I have offered planning conditions limiting the number of pods to 1 only, or limit management of the pod to someone in occupation of Orchard Farmhouse only, so it remains intrinsically linked to the farm. I'm also conscious of the recent appeal decision in the village allowing a new large dwelling against policy. Our application will result in much lesser impact than a new dwelling, both in highways and transport sustainability terms, but deliver diversification and long-term employment benefits. Whilst the inspector in that case accepted Guestwick is a rural area, he noted that development in one village may support services in a nearby village, as would be the case here. We feel the MPPF clearly supports our proposals for economic development and on-farm diversification, and that there's no harm arising from our proposals. As such, we think the benefits will outweigh the harm, if any. We hope that the committee will be able to support our application so that we can deliver the economic diversification and live work employment opportunities discussed, whilst allowing us to provide the care obligations that we have for our son. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Plum, and within time too. Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Councillor Beadle.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the redundant railway line. My recollection of that railway line, it's not a public right of way, and so presumably it's within your ownership. And I noticed from the drawing on the screen is that you have a track running up the railway line. How far does it go, and can potential residents of this glamping site go any further than your boundary?
So the site plan you had that showed the whole farm ownership would be quite useful for this one. Yeah, nearly. So it cuts off at the top, but the straight line central to the holding runs something like 300 meters. So it's a fair length, and we have agricultural access off into the field from it. But it's something we'd want to make available for people that come to stay with us. It's something that we get asked about, but it is a private length, yeah.
And access finishes on your boundary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the speaker? No? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Plum. I now have our local member for the area, Councillor Peck, wishing to speak. So, Councillor Peck, you have 5 minutes to address the committee, and Dawn will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining. So, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. The applicant seeks to support diversification of his agricultural business with small-scale sustainable rural tourism in line with the MPPF and government policy. As it says in the report, the design of the pod is in keeping with its rural surroundings and given its modest nature, will not be significantly intrusive in the existing landscape and therefore is unlikely to have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the area. Given the location of the farm, the nearest neighbouring property, the proposed development and use of the glamping pod is unlikely to cause disturbance to neighbouring residents. In fact, only one comment has been received from a resident, and that is positive in that they support the application. Norfolk County Council Highways do not object. On the contrary, the Highways officer says, and I paraphrase here, on this basis, I feel it very difficult to justify any objection that would be sustainable at appeal. If I may, I will now take the reasons for objection and try and answer them bit by bit. The reason for objection, the first item, is the submitted information does not adequately demonstrate that there is a site-specific demand for the proposed tourist accommodation in this location. It may surprise the officer who wrote the report to know that some people just like to spend time enjoying the Norfolk countryside. Not everyone wants to camp inside settlement areas, towns like Yarmouth and Cromer, or the city of Norwich, or near attractions like dinosaur parks or Bewilderwood. Some people just like going for walks in the countryside and enjoying the natural environment and wildlife. The report claims that this is contrary to Broadland policy, and I think one of the members has already alluded to this. I, of course, disagree, but if it is the case, you are effectively saying that nowhere in my constituency, which has none of the visitor attractions which you seem to think are desirable, can we ever have a tourist business or tourist accommodation. The report also says the site is considered to be in a remote location and away from facilities and services that visitors would be likely to use. Again, being in a remote location seems to be entirely the point of a camping holiday. People who enjoy camping tend to be self-sufficient and will bring basic items with them. In any case, I live in a similar remote location in Broadland, and I seem to cope with obtaining provisions fairly well. The report, excuse my throat, I do apologise. The report states walking or cycling would be on a network of narrow, poorly aligned rural roads, which would not be conducive to such activities. This statement is basically untrue. If you look on the map, and it's already been commented on, I know, the map provided shows that there is a well-maintained track which runs behind the site of the glamping pod, across land owned by the applicant, and leading to woodland and linking to footpaths and byways there. Thus, walking and even cycling is possible without having to use the highways. However, NCC Highways Department don't seem to have a problem with the use of the surrounding lanes for these activities, or indeed using a car to collect provisions. Why are we ignoring the overruling highways recommendations? Again, I live in a single track road similar to those surrounding this property, and I enjoy using the lanes, as many cyclists and ramblers seem to as well. Much more pleasant and safer than walking and cycling to Thorpe Lodge or anywhere in the city. The report says public transport provision locally is negligible, and accordingly, A high reliance on the car is likely to be required. It is considered these constraints are contrary to transport sustainability objectives. I hate to point this out, but this statement applies to most of rural Norfolk. Certainly, I'm struggling to think of anywhere in my constituency that has a regular bus service. Again, if you exclude these tourists on these grounds, we won't have any. In terms of the environment, in a few years, we'll be driving electric cars, so CO2 emissions will no longer be an issue. I'm rushing because I know I haven't got much time. Earlier in the officer's summary, there is mention of minimal benefits of this proposal. Under Section 143 of the Localism Act, and Council is required to consider the impact on local finances. This can be a material consideration. The applicants have a disabled child, and this glamping pod will enable the applicant's wife to run her well-being business from the home whilst allowing her to care for their child. If she can't, that not only would be a heartbreaking for the parents, it will result in a cost to the taxpayer who will have to provide support for the family and provide SEND schooling, etc.
Councillor Peck, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but you have gone over time now.
Okay. Frankly, you would have to have a heart of stone to refuse this application. I would therefore ask members to approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peck. Is there any questions for the local member? No? Okay, thank you very much, speakers. That now moves us to consider the application as a committee, so I'll open it up for comments and debate. Councillor Folger.
Thank you, Chairman. I think basically with the importance of staycations these days and encouraging people to take vacations in this country, and I think the proposal has a good deal of merit, and basically, as has already been mentioned, people do like to come to the country and indulge in rural pursuits, and I think clearly this is a very worthwhile proposal, and I would like to propose that this committee approves it rather than refusal, because I think clearly it's a positive move, and it is in keeping with the current situation, and would assist with providing accommodation in a rural environment for people who wish to holiday and take pleasure in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Folger. Councillor Ward?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to second Councillor Folger's proposal there. I think there is demand for these sort of holidays. You often see adverts for holidays on farms. People like to see the animals and what goes on a farm. So that's certainly not a reason to refuse it. And people like to go out there for bird watching and just to be quiet. So I'm very happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a proposer and a seconder, but we're just continuing to debate this one. So Councillor Greenlew.
Ward got in before me. I was going to second it. And I would just like to reiterate, the one I went to was fantastic. It's booked up a year in advance, and it's in the middle of a field. So I think that's a really good business idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I understand the policies that the officer has outlined and why they're there, but I think that's the reason why we have this committee, is so that we can consider things that are outside of policy and need a different outlook and different view on. And certainly, I'm happy to support the proposal that has been moved by Councillor Folger and Councillor Ward. I think these sites are important. I think that's important to recognise that Broadland can provide these sites as well, and it does allow the farm to continue. Diversification is critical, And I'm very happy to support the proposal that's been said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fisher. I'd certainly echo the comments that you've just made. I think it's really important to support our local businesses, and if there's a need to diversify in the way that you're suggesting, I think we should embrace that and support you with that. I also think people really enjoy staycations and in the rural environment. So we have a proposer, we have a seconder, that is to approve this application. All those in favour?
Sorry,
Yep.
Chair. We just have to clarify the reasons for the going to contrary to policy, and I think you have given those reasons. So I think before we go to the vote, it's always important that we just say what those are. So you're obviously giving weight to the tourism and economic benefits of this proposal. I would just like to add your policy 17 of the joint core strategy does say small scale could be acceptable. I just want also to add this was a balanced decision. We are interpreting your current policies, but you can give weight to other material considerations which you have outlined as those tourism benefits and also those economic benefits of this farm diversification. I would just like to add that I think in discussing it, you were obviously giving weight to the fact that it was going to be operated by the existing business. So a condition to secure that would be appropriate also. So I think just summing that up in what I've heard today, I think that's where you were coming to. So just for clarification, we need that for the records. If you're going contrary to policy, you do need to say those reasons.
Thank you very much, Helen, for your support with that one. So you've heard what Helen said in terms of adding that condition. All in favour? That's unanimous. So thank you very much. That's carried. Thank you. Just need a couple of minutes while we get the IT set up. So we are now moving to application 2021-1098. That's 60 School Road in Frettenham, and that's starting on page 32 of our papers. We have Nigel Harris, Area Planning Manager, here with us to present this item. So I'll invite Nigel to present away. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. Final change of engine driver for last few applications. So we've got a householder application here, erection of a side and rear extension with accommodation within the loft, consisting of construction of a veranda and also a balcony. Move to the next slide. Just put the site in context. That's number 60. The plot measures approximately 80 metres long from the site frontage to the road to the rear where it backs onto an open field. You've got a bungalow to the north, number 62, that sits slightly forward of the host property. To the rear, you've got number 56 to 58 Mill Road. You don't see it on here, but you will in later slides, but there's actually been a plot subdivision and a chalet has been constructed in this location here. So if we move on, the application site itself sits here. Having read the report, you'll be aware that matters of ecology were raised, principally in relation to the proximity of the site to 3 water bodies. There are 3 ponds locally to the application site. And in response to that, a preliminary ecology investigation was carried out and some mitigation is suggested, which we would look to include and incorporate within any approval by way of condition in terms of mitigation, which would relate to reptile fencing, checking of foundations when they're dug, etc. Purely to mitigate any impacts on the likelihood of there being newts on site because of the proximity to those watercourses. Closer view of the site, so that's the aerial view, number 60. It's a chalet bungalow. It does have first floor accommodation, large detached flat roof garage on its south side. Here you see that forward relationship of number 62. You can see here that's a bungalow. Roughly the rear is in line with the front of the application site. Then 56 to 58 here, which is a 2-storey dwelling, quite a substantial elevation on their north, which abuts the application site. And then that plot subdivision, which is located in here. And I've got photos and a block plan of that. I think important to note as well, while this slide is up, is the vegetation that exists in the rear of the property in terms of site boundaries and within neighbouring curtilages as well. That's the block plan of number 58A, a property that's now constructed forward of 56 to 58. Put this slide up just to show the relationship with the application site. The works themselves are proposed in this area here, so unlikely to be any impacts on number 58A. Existing ground floor, it's a 2-bed chalet bungalow currently, seeking effectively to double in size. That's the existing front elevation to Mill Road. Proposal will see a porch go on the front elevation, a new pitched roof over the existing flat roof dormer. And then you will see the plans which show an extension of the existing eaves and ridge line out to the back. So that's existing elevations. That's the existing rear elevation. Noteworthy, you've got a window at first floor level to the rear. This is the block plan. This is the proposal. So proposal to extend out, continuing the height of the existing chalet to the rear and a side extension. Originally, this side extension had a pitched roof that came to a gable on this boundary. There were concerns about the relationship and impact of that gable on the relationship with Millview 56 to 58. And the roof has been hipped back to what we consider as an acceptable form and design and relationship. Noteworthy as well that a substantial part of that flat roofed flat roof garage is to be demolished and removed to allow the extension to take place. So again, just to remind you of the relationship with number 58A to the front. And then the plans. So we have a ground floor extension, or the accommodation that's proposed on the ground floor. An existing lounge at the front will be converted to a bedroom on the ground floor, and then to the rear, the ground floor element incorporates a new kitchen, diner and lounge with an open veranda to the rear, and the first floor comes over the top of that veranda. So those doors open out onto that enclosed veranda in terms of a roof over that's open-sided, and that gives access out to the rear garden. Upstairs, proposed within that rear extension and to the side is to create a master bedroom with an ensuite within that hipped roof area, and the incorporation of a balcony to the rear. Now, it's important to note that that balcony is recessed within the roof space of the extension. So effectively, the side roof areas are blinkered in terms of direct views to the sides, looking to the north and to the south by the actual roof structure, because that balcony is recessed within. So it limits views principally to down the garden, and there may be some overview of the rear aspect of neighbouring gardens, but not to an extent that we consider we could justify a refusal of the application. That's a proposed front elevation. I refer to the new front porch. They're doing some cladding on that front gable. New pitched roof over that flat roof dormer. This is that side extension that I was referring to. Originally, it showed a gabled roof, so that void area would have been filled in right up to the boundary, but that roof has now been hipped to limit any impacts on the adjoining neighbour to the south. That's the north elevation, one roof light within that. So the roof height matches that of the existing chalet, as does the eaves height. That's that open veranda that I referred to. And then that balcony is recessed to within this roof space. So as you can see, there's no direct so you can't step out onto that balcony and get a direct view immediately north or south because of the roof structure that encloses it. That's the opposing elevation to the south, that hipped roof, gable on the dormer, and again, balcony set within this area here above the veranda, enclosed within the roof space. That's the balcony at the back, the rear elevation, so that's the side extension. That veranda on the ground floor, and then the balcony itself here. It sits within, obviously, a restricted headroom because of the being within the roof space. So in terms of physically being able to stand up within the balcony, you're limited to an area in relation to here because then of the sloping roof height. So moving to photographs, this is looking, the application site itself, the driveway access is here to number 60. This is principally to show number 58A, that new chalet that's been constructed to the front of 56 to 58. And then you can just pick up number 62, the bungalow to the north. A view from within the rear garden of that new chalet, 58A, they have a garage on the boundary with the application site. You can just make out the roof of the garage to the application site here. And as you can see, it's fairly well screened, so we don't consider any impact on 58A. That's the frontage of the existing application site. That was that garage you just saw the photo of, number 58A. You can make out the elevation side gable of the house, 56 to 58 here. And again, you can see the amount of vegetation on site. This is to the front of number 56 to 58, the relationship with that application site. So that extension will be coming out in this area here in terms of a continuation of the roof of the existing chalet, and then that hipped roof in an area here. And we consider with that hipped roof going back into the site, that now has an acceptable relationship with this property. Looking at number 62 in relation to the application site, again, noteworthy that bungalow sits forward of number 60. And again, vegetation backdrop that you see, which is picked up here in terms of the rear view of number 60. So 56 to 58 is to the left on your screen, number 62 to the right here. You've got some evergreen vegetation on the boundary in terms of laurels, etc. And that balcony will be roughly at this level here. Obviously, that extension will come forward into the rear aspect, but it will follow a similar form to this, with a balcony being contained within that roof space. Again, looking, that's number 56 to 58, just to show that relationship. You've got a blank brick gable, 2-storey. Looking down the garden on that southern boundary, again, you can see the amount of vegetation and the vegetation on the northern boundary with number 62, which is picked up here as well. And then look straight down the garden, as I say, fields behind the application site. So just summarising the report in front of you, it's acknowledged the proposal almost doubles the size of the existing dwelling. However, it is considered that the sizable plot and position between neighbouring dwellings can accommodate these without significant detriment to amenity or the character and appearance of the area. In terms of neighbour amenity, the change of roof from gable to hip on that side extension is considered to have an acceptable relationship with the 2 dwellings to the south. And the first floor balcony is not considered to give rise to a degree of overlooking so significant as to justify a reason for refusal. Point out the supplementary schedule to you. There has been a further representation received in relation to the balcony from the neighbours who live to the north of the site. However, it's considered that that balcony is acceptable for reasons already stated. Report before you sets out that neighbour amenity and other key considerations, concludes that the proposal is in accordance with the relevant development plan policies and therefore is recommended for approval, subject to conditions as set out on page 40 of the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Nigel. So over to you, members. Any questions to Nigel on his presentation? Councillor Ward.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, Nigel. Is there still sufficient space to walk from the front to the back garden, the sort of width of a wheelie bin, for example, to get through?
I believe there would be, yes. I mean, if you look at, that's the block plan. If we go to the photographs, I think there is space down either side, certainly sufficient to be able to walk and drag a wheelie bin.
Thank you. Any other questions for Nigel? Councillor Prutton.
Could you kindly scroll right back to the very first photograph you showed us, which was in the middle of the block plans, where it was an aerial view looking downwards? Keep going. Keep going. It was a photograph. That one, looking down on the house. Is there another one? Can you just go a little further back? I'll tell you why I ask. It's because I'm concerned. Keep going, please. Is there another one? No, there isn't. I was concerned about the fact that it's this development, if it goes ahead, will double the footprint. And I was very conscious that it looked as though it was going to gobble up a great deal of the back garden, which was currently enjoying sunshine. And if it then took away the area of back garden that was enjoying sunshine, I then thought there might be a threat on the trees, the greenery all around. And we had an issue like this on the appeals panel not long ago, where overdevelopment of the proposed accommodation took away so much of the garden that the trees at the bottom were under threat. And I was a little worried about the lack of back garden if it goes ahead this much. What do you think, Nigel?
Certainly I can pick up. I mean, you've got a very substantial back garden still remaining. And say that plot depth from front to back is 80 metres. Your design guide seeks minimum garden depth of 10 metres. You're well in excess of that, certainly in respect of this. I think the centre point is about 35 metres from here back to the rear boundary. So an extension at max of 8 metres, you've still got a very significant rear garden. And then just to relate that to the photo, you're talking about an extension coming back to about here. So you've still got very substantial rear garden. That's to the east. You know, there's no reason why they can't enjoy also the frontage garden, which then will get afternoon sun to the west as well, because you've almost got the same amount of curtilage, both front and back.
So where you say the proposal will come about there, you said that's a great big clump of trees, isn't it?
Yeah, they're small garden trees at this point here. The big substantial trees that you see are on the boundary, and they're under no threat whatsoever.
No TPOs on them.
There's no TPOs on them, no. Because they're not under threat.
No. All right. Thank you. Thank you for being patient with me.
Thank you both very much for that. Any other questions for Nigel? No? Thank you very much. Thank you, Nigel. We have one registered speaker. It's still morning. Good morning, Karen, a local member for the Frettenham. And so, Karen, thank you for your patience while we got to this item. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, and Dawn will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining. So please do start when you're ready. Thank you.
Grand. Hopefully I won't need that much. I think the issue really is with the balcony and the existence of the balcony. It's been contested, and I've asked to present an objection to that because the neighbours, by both neighbours and the parish council, it is the balcony on the south, the large, even with a recess, it has a sort of still gives you a viewing angle of about 157 degrees. Is about 5 meters by 1.5 meters, and as Nigel said, that you can't stand. You stand really in 2 meter by 1.5 meter space available. So it's really the issue and concern is about sort of two main areas. One is about the overshadowing and the privacy issues with the neighbours, both of whom have objected. And it's about finding equity within the neighbours. A Juliet balcony isn't under objection. If they had a Juliet balcony rather than the large 2 meter by 1.5, it would be fine. But it's the fact that you can stand, you can sit there and have your tea and coffee and drinks, etc., and you've got quite a substantial viewing angle even with recess. And it's the detriment to the amenity value and reduce the quality of the lives of the neighbours. And the other point is that it would set a design precedence in Frettenham sort of for these sort of kind of large balconies, of which there aren't, they don't exist at the moment, and potentially. Yeah, it's about finding that balance between the needs of the neighbours and the desire to get optimum value out of your own property, really. And so it's sort of finding that fair and equitable balance for both parties and for the village itself. So if people want a sense of how big it is, I actually have a meter, well, no, not a meter, but a kind of measure thing, because there has been, I suppose, the part of the challenge with this planning application is that initially it was put up with a Juliet balcony that set a kind of expectation. There was it would then sort of swap round that was actually not the plan that the owners had wanted, and so then it was sort of demonstrated that the new plans with the balcony, and it hasn't been clear how large it has been, and that's been quite a concern for the neighbours, and just sort of in a view to find that balance and equitable kind of access and amenity value, and ensure that all parties have sort of their well-being and amenity value considered in the decision. That's why we asked it to be brought to the committee, really. If it was swapped with a Juliet balcony, that would be no problem, and they could still open up their windows. It would open in, and they could still have their amenity value, and you wouldn't have the same sort of overlooking issues and concerns, and just sort of the design precedent set for Frettenham. So I think that's it, really.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lawrence. So, members, any questions? Nope, you got off lightly there. Thank you very much. So that will now bring us to the point that we as a committee consider the application and go on to determine it. So I'll open it up to members to comment and ask questions. Over to you. Councillor Creamy Gouvenlou.
I understand Karen's point of view with the balcony, but a Juliet balcony, you can still sit and open the windows and still sit there and look out in the gardens, and you're going to have roughly the same perspective as you would on the ordinary balcony that's already been proposed. Would you not think?
No, because it juts out and you get a more of a kind of angular view, really, because you're sort of, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, the Juliet gives you a far more kind of vertical viewpoint, whereas sitting on a kind of balcony, even with a recess, gives you about a viewing angle of about 157 degrees. So it's about your view of angle, and sort of when you're sitting there. That's the difference.
Okay. Okay. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, when I've read this, obviously balconies are always an issue. And my area in Thorpe St Andrews, sort of bungalow land, and we have these issues probably every couple of months. And more people are sticking gable end windows into the extensions. This already has a gable end window, so the views down the garden from that point of view are already determined. I think the amendment of the side extension to the hip roof is sensible. And the way they've actually designed this balcony, I think, is actually quite commendable, because they've managed to get a balcony without, I believe, impacting on the neighbours. I know what the local member says, but I really have I don't see this will be an issue of overlooking at all. And I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation on page 40. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fisher. Thank you, Councillor Folger. Councillor Ward, that you wanted to speak.
Yes, I was just going to say I don't see any problem with the balcony, and I think one of the reasons they didn't want a Juliet is so that they've got that overhang so they can sit under cover. I believe that was as I understood it. So I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Does anyone else wish to speak who hasn't? No? Okay, so we have a proposer and a seconder to follow the officer recommendation, which is approval subject to conditions as set out on page 40 of our papers. All in favour? Thank you very much. That's been carried, and thank you for your patience, Karen. Members, I propose to continue if you're all happy without a further adjournment at this stage. Yeah, okay, thank you. That now takes us to item number 2, and that's application 2021-0727, Cranleigh House, South Walsham Road, Upton, starting on page 21 of our papers. This application will again be presented by Nigel Harris. So I'll invite Nigel to present to us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Chairman. So item 2, the application is before you today as the site is outside of a settlement limit and does not accord with a specific allocation or policy of the development plan, and as such is contrary to policy GC2 of the DMDPD. One update to report to the agenda, and that's contained in the supplementary schedule, where we have further comments from Upton Parish Council maintaining an objection to the relocated point of access and also to the principle of development. To go to the slide presentation, just to put the site in context, it's within the parish of Upton. The main settlement of Upton is located some way to the north, approached via South Walsham Road and then Church Lane that leads into Upton itself, but Upton it does not have a settlement limit. Property is located here, as I said. It's more closely associated in terms of travel distance to Acle, to the southeast. as you can see in terms of its proximity. You have got a small enclave of development here. You've got the existing application site that was a former hotel with manager's dwelling that's now a single dwelling with annex. You've got an industrial development, employment premises, and there's also about another 6 dwellings in quite close proximity. You've also got, the report does indicate that we've got comments from the Broads Authority. The Broads Authority boundary runs something similar to this, but there are no relationship issues in terms of any impacts in terms of setting of the Broads Authority area. So that's the application site. Nearest settlement limit is Acle to the southeast, directly approached via South Walsham Road. And that just puts it in context. That's the nearest settlement limit. So we're outside and in countryside location. View of the application site. That is the extent of the application site. Quite a large plot, as you can see. Did refer to an industrial use and employment premises. Quite a large scale operation takes place here. You have got another dwelling here and another 3 or 4 dwellings just off the slide to the southeast. Application site. Proposal is to widen the existing point of access. Originally, the point of access was proposed right at this corner, the western corner of the application site on the bend in the road. And we did get highway comments originally that indicated no objections subject to conditions, but they were reviewed and they did subsequently object to the position of that location. They've had a site meeting with the applicant and agreed that a widening of the existing point of access can take place with then 2 separate driveways, one leading to the existing dwelling, and there's a proposal for a detached garage here. And then again, coming off that widened access, a new dwelling to serve the proposed subdivision, which is the existing annex in this location, and then creating curtilages to both. So that residential curtilage and access to that unit, and then this amount of curtilage and access to the existing unit. That's the west elevation as exists. The red line, or the line you just see here, is purely to illustrate the proposed division between the 2 properties. That's from the rear, or the opposing angle on the east elevation. And this just shows how that line separates internally. I think there's a couple of utility rooms here, and so there's a natural break. So that line doesn't follow all the way through. It doglegs and then goes through. Elevations of the proposed garage, set well back from the road frontage, quite subordinate to the existing 2.5-storey dwelling, as you will see in these photographs. So that's the existing main entrance. That point of entrance is to be widened to the left side to then create a second driveway. That's the existing point of entrance, you can see there. And then views to the west and east. So this is to the oncoming traffic direction. And say the earlier scheme proposed a point of access quite close to where the black and white chevron sign was located here, marking the bend. Clearly unacceptable in that location, so it's been resited back to the existing access. And then the view to the east. Existing frontage. So that garage proposed within this area here, where you've got that existing gravelled parking area to the front. That proposed division between the existing built forms. That's the annex currently that was a former dwelling, the manager's dwelling, when the property was in use as a hotel. And then we've just got some views around the outside of that. Clearly will have its own independent curtilage and privacy. Quite extensive curtilages, as you see there. Take members to summary of the application. It's quite useful to run through this because I don't think we've had a proposal similar to this come to members before. As I say, site is contrary to GC2 of your DMDPD. However, as set out in the assessment before you under the subheading principle of development and material considerations on pages 26 to 28 of the agenda. It is the government's own view that isolated homes in the countryside can occur where, in accordance with paragraph 80 of the MPPF, or the framework as it's known, which provides exceptions to policies within the development plan and can take precedence where one or more of the listed circumstances apply. The relevant one here is paragraph 80D of the framework set out in your report, and this sets out a clear and recent statement of the government's policy in relation to the acceptability of residential subdivisions in rural location. The proposals relate to the subdivision of an existing residential dwelling and therefore meets the exception test for residential subdivision set out in the framework. It is also of material consideration that paragraph 80D of the framework does not require development comprising from the subdivision of an existing dwelling to be near to community facilities and other services normally associated with a parish within a settlement limit. Recent appeal decisions around the country would appear to support the precedents that paragraph 80D of the framework carries over planning policy, and unless there are compelling reasons for a refusal, this is a material consideration of considerable weight. The remainder of the assessment provides a consideration of the other key issues relating to highway safety, residential amenity, and character and appearance of the area, and finds no significant harms subject to the imposition of conditions. Refer to the further comments from Upton Parish Council contained in the supplementary schedule, and specifically in relation to their comments on the revised access arrangements. It is to be noted that the Highway Authority does not object, subject to the imposition of conditions. Proposal is therefore considered on balance, and in this particular case, to be acceptable, and is recommended for conditional approval as set out on page 31 of your agenda. Thanks again, Chairman.
Thank you, Nigel, very much. Any questions for Nigel? Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Nigel, can you just remind me again where the new garage is going to be built, please?
Located here. Whether you recall from the photograph that I showed of the frontage of the property, and there was that sort of circular gravelled area to the front, and it just sits on the outer edge of that. But again, well set back from the road frontage, and you've then got buildings to the southeast that sit further forward as well.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Any other questions for Nigel? No, I have one if I may, so I'll jump in. Nigel, you just mentioned that the Highways Authority were supportive of the amended access subject to conditions. I just wanted to check my understanding on that. In paragraph 4.3 of the report, it said, if I can find it, should your authority be minded to approve the application, I'd be grateful for the inclusion of the following conditions and informative note on any consent notice issued. It wasn't listed, so I went back to the Highways Authority's response, and I then looked at paragraph 5.18, and I'm not sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure if the detail of the conditions has actually flowed through in full to the conditions attached to the approval. And I think in essence, the additional bit what the Highways Authority seemed to be saying is that whilst we've picked up that the access needs to be constructed in this way, the Highways Authority was saying it should thereafter be retained in that position as of their approved plan. And I just wanted to be sure that we are fully covering the conditions. Thank you.
I can confirm, yes, we are. I've actually got a copy of the Highway Authority comments, which were dated the 6th of December, and those conditions, which are listed 1, 2, and 3, are then carried forward into the recommendation. So that's confirmed.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions, comments? We have no public speakers on this particular item, so it's just our opportunity to discuss the application before we determine it.
Move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Do you have a seconder? We have a proposer and a seconder to move the officer's recommendation to approve as set out on page 31 of our papers, and that's with the conditions as Nigel's just referred to. All in favour?
Unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's carried. The officer's recommendation to approve has been carried. Thank you. That now takes us on to the last application before us. That's item 4. That's 2021-1316 54 Freeland Close, Taverham. Nigel, the final one for you to present to us today. This application was before the committee very recently, so I'd find it extremely helpful if you can just explain why this is back before us and what's changed since we last considered it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Item 4. So 54 Freeland Close, proposal for a single-storey side extension. I think key to this is the resolution of the Planning Committee at its meeting on 1st of December 2021, when members resolved to agree the officer recommendation that was before them on the day, which was to delegate the authority to the AD Place to approve the application subject to securing an amended plan from the applicant delivering the provision of a second parking space. There was then nothing further to that resolution that if we didn't receive that amended plan, that we could then proceed to determine the application by way of a refusal. That's the reason why it's coming back to you, because the applicant, as I think he indicated on the day back in December, that he doesn't want to provide that second parking space. Therefore, we didn't have authority to refuse the application. That's why it has to come back to members today to determine the application on its merits again. I'm just looking around the room as to those that were present previously. Do you want me to just run through the presentation again that we had?
You should, Nigel.
Yeah.
I think we should do that. I think there are some different members. We have a duty to do that.
That's fine. So, application site, we're in the estate known as Thorpe Marriott, but the Taverham part of Thorpe Marriott, quite a dense development that exists between Reefham Road and Taverham Road, Fakenham Road to the south. So a state form of development, as you see here, quite high density. You've got a lot of terraced and semi-detached properties, many of which have exercised permitted development rights, which has actually seen the number of car parking spaces serving each property reduced. This is the application site, so it's a corner property. So planning permission is required for the extension to the side because it has a principal elevation to Freeland Close. So that's the front of the property. You've got a junction here on Freeland Close. Freeland Close comes in, I think, off Felsham Way, and it's a cul-de-sac, so it's not a through road in terms of vehicular traffic. Has a side to Freeland Close, footpath around the side and the frontage, and then it has what was historically 2 tandem car parking spaces to the rear, but a structure has been put up, I think it's a garden office, over one of the parking spaces, so just one within curtilage car parking space exists. Proposal is to extend at single-storey level on that southwest elevation. It's to create more downstairs living space in terms of a relocated kitchen and dining area, because within the existing lounge area, a bedroom is proposed. That bedroom could be, it's important to point out that that bedroom could be formed in any event without planning permission. It's only the new footprint of the extension that requires planning permission. Elevational form. It's a hipped roof side extension, materials that match the existing property. There are some computer generated images which we'll just go through. So that's the sort of corner front side elevation, retention of brick and timber fencing to the side and to the rear. And then we move to some photographs of the site. So that's looking at it from the southeast. That footway that wraps around the side and the frontage. View to the side, where you're just coming into view the existing access driveway to number 54. and then their existing over large single car parking space. That's a structure which I've referred to, which has been placed over what was a tandem car parking space, not dissimilar to what the neighbours got next door. They have a garage, but that garage doesn't have to be used as a parking space, and it could be converted to ancillary accommodation, which would reduce the amount of car parking to other properties. This is a refusal of an earlier scheme where the applicant tried to subdivide the plot to get another dwelling to the side, and was refused as an overdevelopment, and on the fact that a new dwelling on the site would therefore create a demand for additional parking spaces. But the application was refused as an overdevelopment and insufficient parking to serve the proposed development. And then we go to what is proposed now, showing the footprint of the new extension and the single parking space that exists. So I'll leave members on that. You know the reason why the application has come back before you. The applicant doesn't want to provide that second parking space. I think it's important to put it into context in terms of your discussion that will follow, that the Highway Authority will not support an objection based on highway safety, with the lack of provision of a second parking space. They indicated in earlier comments it might give rise to a degree of inconvenience, but it wouldn't give rise to a highway safety issue. Therefore, what it's coming down to really is a determination as to whether the proposal is acceptable without the provision of that additional parking space. You've got two policies relating to the provision of parking. One is the Taveram Neighbourhood Plan, tab 7, that indicates that car parking provision for all new developments in the plan shall be in accordance with the adopted parking standards of Broadland District Council. Parking should be located to be discreet, accessible and appropriate to the character of the proposed development. I'd also refer you to DMDPD policy TS4 parking guidelines, that within new developments, appropriate parking and manoeuvring space should be provided to reflect the use and location as well as its accessibility by non-car modes. Important to refer you to, though, is the supporting text to policy TS4 that does refer to a written ministerial statement in March 2015, where it was stated that local planning authorities should only impose local parking standards for residential and non-residential development where there is a clear and compelling justification that it is necessary to manage their local road network. Consequently, the acceptability of the parking provision within developments will be considered as part of the overall assessment of the development proposal and the impacts that may arise from it. So we have adopted the County Council's parking standards that would indicate for a 3-bed dwelling, 2 car parking spaces should be provided, but you do have to take into account the ministerial guidance and also determine it on its merits as to whether 2 spaces is essential and not just desirable, but essential in this location, for reasons, 1, for it to comply with your development plan, and 2, in respect of highway safety. We are suggesting, as the update report indicates, that the proposal is acceptable without the provision of that second parking space, and therefore the recommendation before you on page 43 is that the proposal should be approved subject to 2 conditions, 1 being the timescale condition and 2 just tying it to the plans and documents, with no second parking space to be provided or secured. So I've got nothing further to add. Oh yes, I have actually, apologies. I was notified this morning by email by the case officer, Tom Barker, who only returned from Christmas leave today, that actually he had a further letter of representation, which didn't make the supplementary schedule because Tom was off when this came in. So if it's okay, Chair, I'll just briefly summarise the objection that we've had. It's from someone that has made comment already as part of the application process, and I'll just summarise this 4 points. The property at number 54 Freeling Close was originally supplied with 2 parking spaces. Mr. Dawson has previously applied to build on this land, and on each occasion the application was declined, and one of the reasons was lack of 2 parking spaces. Once again, this application has been submitted with only 1 parking space. I have noticed that a second car is being parked outside the property and is parking partly on the pavement, causing the problems highlighted in the earlier comments. 2. I would also like to say that at present, due to the number of cars currently parking either on the road or partly on the pavement, a number of people are walking on the road due to lack of space to walk on them. If the required parking space is reduced to 1 instead of the standard 2, there will be less walking space. It will also be expected that the 3-bedroom house will lead to more than 2 cars at the house. The original second space is now occupied by a garden office. If the garden office was located within the original fence boundary, then it is possible that the application would have been declined due to lack of garden space. 4th point essentially relates to issues of covenants in relation to boundary treatments, which are a civil matter and not ones to take into account as part of determination of the planning application. So, yeah, apologies. There was that late reporting of that further comment of objection, but it was received in time to be able to be reported. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for sharing that with us. We have no registered speakers, so it's an opportunity to ask Nigel a question on his presentation first off. Any questions? No, I'll open it up for discussion and debate then. Councillor Karimi Gouverneur.
I am still under the opinion that this property needs 2 parking spaces. This property is on a junction. It is a dense development, I do admit, and to have that space for the parking is essential on this. There is history of the car being parked on the junction, which under the highway code is illegal, which is not relevant here. But I'm really surprised after the long discussion we had last time about the parking spaces that he's not willing to provide a second parking space. It is essential, and it is in the neighbourhood plan, Taberham neighbourhood plan. The parish council are against not having 2 parking spaces. That is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Ward next.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I was quite happy when we discussed it last time, happy that it had 1 parking space, and I'm still happy. I still share that opinion, so I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Any other comments? Councillor Beadle and then Councillor Fisher.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I believe I voted for 2 car parking places last time. And we do come across these situations where larger vehicles, let alone fire engines and what have you, find it very difficult to get down these roads. Having said that, I don't think there's any way this application would be turned down on appeal. I think they would get it on appeal. And so on that basis, I'm going to change my view. Thank you.
Can I just make another point, please?
I'll just go to Councillor Fisher. Councillor Fisher, then back to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I totally understand what the local members say, but I mean, we have debated it before. Obviously, the applicant's not willing. To enforce it, we're being told would be difficult. It is a determination of whether it's desirable or essential, and desirable is fine. Essential, according to highways, it's not. So I'm happy to support Councillor Ward's moment of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Councillor Karimi Gouverneur, you want to say something else?
Yeah, I think we've got to remember this is being turned into a 3-bedroomed house, and this gentleman may not stay in this building for the rest of his life. This could become a family home with teenagers who have 1 or 2 cars. 1 parking space for a 3-bedroom house is not sufficient and is against the Taberham neighbourhood plan. I just want to make this statement.
Thank you. I'd like just to follow up on that. the Taverham neighbourhood plan is a fairly recently adopted plan. And as Nigel had referred to, TAV7 states, taking into account the proposal and its location, parking provision should include adequate off-street parking for the size of the dwelling, which has been increased from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom. So I do think it's a consideration that we should take on board. My other comment is the fact it's come before us is because it's on a corner plot. So it's something that there is a concern for it to come forward in that way. The fact that it's parking on a junction is again a consideration for me. So I voted against it last time and I still have concerns.
Sorry, just one more comment. There is a history of that junction being blocked by the car parking on the path. And if anybody comes along with a buggy or a wheelchair, they have to walk into the road. So I'm not happy about that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Adams, I think you
Yeah.
wanted to speak.
I haven't brought my MPPF with me this morning, but I do distinctly remember that there has to be, when a neighbourhood plan actually states a certain policy, there has to be very strong reasons for not taking or for not implementing what the neighbourhood plan says. So I would like Nigel's opinion as to why, when the MPPF places such emphasis on the neighbourhood plan and that it should be adhered to unless there are overwhelming reasons why it isn't, what his reasons are for ignoring the MPPF on neighbourhood plan.
Through you, Chair, it's not an issue of ignoring, it's taking everything into account, and we are reaching a balanced conclusion and recommendation in these particular circumstances, weighing up the policies that will pull in different directions. This is what we deal with all the time. You'll have policies in favour, policies against. It's a balance, but we feel in this particular instance that balance weighs in favour of the application providing only that one parking space. There is further in relation to the MPPF, para 111, development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. It just furthers the position of the Highway Authority, certainly in terms of highway safety, that they do not consider there to be a highway safety issue in relation to this application. It comes down purely to the number of car parking spaces, and to a certain extent there's a little bit of divergence between the DMDPD policy in terms of wording and supporting text and Taverham neighbourhood plan policy, in terms of the application of adopted standards, but it does come down to its individual merits and the particular circumstances of this case and the location. And on balance, we conclude that one space is sufficient for this property in this location.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Any further comments before we go to the vote? Nope. So we've had a proposer that the officer recommendation for approval is accepted as proposed by Councillor Ward and seconded by Councillor Fisher. All those in favour? All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Take it, ma'am. Yeah, and that it be refused, or that it goes back to the director of place, that if the applicant still refuses to provide 2 parking spaces, that the director of place is how should I put it? Will refuse the application. I'm not sure, Helen, whether that, but you get the general.
As you say,
drift.
I mean, we've lost the votes. You're now going for refusal because there isn't another option on the table. And we know the applicant isn't going to submit an amended plan. So it is to refuse it. I think what we've heard today, I think you obviously haven't summed anything out yet, Councillor Adams, but noting what Councillor Creamy Govan-Lew was saying, I think you are saying that the 2 spaces are essential given the location of this dwelling because it's being extended, the location of this dwelling on the junction and lack of off-street parking is contrary to the Taysborough neighbourhood plan that seeks to require 2 spaces per 3-bedroom dwelling. So I think that's what you are summing up as your reasons for refusal. It's on a junction, and parking, 2 spaces or a parking, giving the creation of a 2-bedroom, and then obviously it's contrary to the neighbourhood plan policy.
You know, Helen, that's exactly what I was just going to say.
Okay, so that was what you were going to say, Tony. So you're proposing that, and that you second it, Caroline. So on that basis, all in favour of refusal as stated?
7 for.
Against?
2 against.
So that's been carried as a refusal. Thank you very much, members. That brings us to the end of our applications today. We have item 6, appeals, and I'll invite Nigel. Is that Nigel or Helen?
No,
Nigel.
that'll be me. That'll be me.
Thank you, Nigel.
Just to say, we try and bring one of these each month, depending on what appeals we've got on the books currently. But there's a decision to report back on 46 Taven Road, Drayton. It was a delegated refusal of a subdivided plot, essentially to put a dwelling behind an existing frontage property. The appeal was allowed. The refusal cited grounds of being an unacceptably cramped form of development that would also impact on the amenities of the neighbouring property because of relationship with driveway and parking areas, etc. The inspector took some of that on board. He didn't consider the form of development was out of character with the area and pointed to a backland plot next door. He felt there would be some inconvenience and disturbance to neighbours, but not that it would be so unacceptable. He also put great weight on the fact that this was in the settlement limit and was within an existing residential area and close to services and facilities, and therefore deemed it to be a sustainable form of development. You've then got a note of 4 appeals which have been submitted and are currently before us. So the reminder of the ground-mounted solar farm, which came before members in April last year, nearly said this year, which was officer recommendation for a temporary approval, i.e. for a 25-year approval. That was refused by members because of the high proportion of best and most versatile land, and also the cumulative impacts associated with an existing solar farm nearby. That was, say, refused by members. That's proceeding to a hearing, which the date of which is to be arranged. We've then got 3 further appeals, all of which were delegated refusals. Telephone mast or a telecoms mast, Dussindale Drive. We refused a prior notification application for quite a substantial telecom mast deemed to be out of character with the locality in terms of the residential scale, and also harmful appearance and close proximity, particularly to dominating and imposing to a neighbouring property. That's proceeding to a written reps appeal. We've then got 2 further appeals in relation to one for housing in Coltishall outside the settlement limit, backland form of development, extending into countryside, full refusal, which is now proceeding to a written reps appeal, and also change of use of land, some wasteland, but still in the countryside, on Salhouse Road, Rackheath, to a hand car wash facility. Significant harm to character and appearance of the countryside location. That was refused, and again that's now subject to a written reps appeal. So in due course, when we get decisions, we'll be reporting back on those 4 in addition to any others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Councillor Adams, sorry.
Just very quickly, Madam Chairman, I think, Helen, it's very vital that you get your letter off to the Chief Planning Inspector, because with all these appeals coming up, if the present trend sort of continues, most of those I think might well be overturned. But that's just a comment.
Just to note that the ones we're writing about, those where the interpretation of the policy has been inconsistent by the inspector on those outside the development limits, the one just allowed was in the development limits. It was just purely on the character and form.
Thank you very much. That now completes the business of the Planning Committee today, and I formally close the meeting at 12:35.